This is Black Country Blokes chewing the fat.
Listen.
I've been hearing a lot lately about men don't talk, but in my experience, men do talk, just people aren't listening. So it's going to be me and a group of blokes discussing our struggles and victories through life. Warning, there may be some bad language, so apologies to all the moms, especially my own. Let's get going.
Listen.
Abby new gang, this is Kev Dillon with the Black Country Blokes chewing the fat. We've got Lee Cadman, Craig Pinches, Aaron Jew, and today we've got a very special guest, Jenny Gordon, who's coming to us from Black Country Women's Aid. Now, we're supposed to be having Debbie Slater on today, but for unforeseen circumstances, she can't make it. So just send my love out to Debbie. You're a remarkable woman, and we'll get you back on very soon. But we've managed to get hold of Jenny Gordon, who also works with the Black Country Women's Aid. And don't let the name fool you. They work with men as well. So Jenny, if you wouldn't mind just telling us about your roles and what your organisation does.
Okay, hi, yeah, I'm Jenny Gordon and I work at Black Country Women's Aid. As you say, it open to men and women and children and young people. So sometimes the name itself can feel like a barrier to access support, but we are absolutely open for business for men. So my role, I have a number of roles inside the organisation. I manage the domestic abuse and sexual violence services, and I also am therapeutic lead. So I run the counselling service there. We do we did do face-to-face counselling, but at the moment it's telephone and obviously online. We'll look to reinstating hopefully the face-to-face back in potentially September. And we've piloted a men's group, which was quite successful late last year. And I co-facilitated that.
Well, I imagine at the moment, with everyone being locked up, domestic abuse at the moment must be, just terrible. Where you can't escape your partner, you can't go to work, you can't go to the gym, you're locked in with a person who's doing the most harm to you.
Absolutely. I think, there's lots of government campaigns lots of people are very nervous about that people are trapped in very dysfunctional and quite, harmful situations at home, that they can't reach to a phone. Normal avenues of support are cut off. So we're doing everything in our power we're open for business. We're seen as as one of the key workers. So the big message for us is we're open for business. If you need us, we're there. We're trying to work creatively by working, by telephoning people when they can, or using online services, just getting the message out through GPs, through pharmacies, food banks, anywhere really, just to let people know that we are available. If you do need emergency accommodation, we can provide it. Again, the you're not on your own message, absolutely. Because there is concern, that obviously on lockdown, that all of us, when lockdown finishes, that there's going to be a huge surge in referrals. So we're planning for that as well. We're looking at all contingencies as to what needs to be done, but really just trying to work as creatively as we can to be there for people when they need us.
Has anyone got anything to say to that? No.
Well, yeah, sorry, the mic was muted and I had to reach up to get it. I know you're probably going to mention this towards the end as well, but just so as we have like a couple of mentions of it, do you have a website where people can find you?
Absolutely. I think it's just blackcountrywomens'aid.co.uk. There are privacy buttons if someone comes into the room and you need to shut it down quickly. There are those. There are different areas of the website which look predominantly at domestic abuse, sexual violence, therapeutic counselling. There are WhatsApp numbers you can now contact rather than a telephone number if it's difficult to talk. There are WhatsApp numbers there where you can talk, without speaking. So there's that telephone number, which is a 24-hour number, 0121 553 0090. And as the name suggests, it's Black Country Women's Aid. So we work across the whole of the Black Country, Walsall, Sandwell, Dudley, and Wolverhampton.
All these numbers as well are in the comments, so they're already there as we speak. If you look in the description, that number will be in there, and the website if anyone does need to go to it.
Right.
I
would
think
also say that, I mean, as it's
Sorry.
Mental Health Awareness Week, one of the, I think, if there's anything, I suppose, good to come out of this pandemic, which is that people's mental health it has come very much into the spotlight. And there's an awful lot. If you just literally type in men's mental health awareness into Google, so much stuff comes up at the moment and really helpful. There's one, it looks like a relatively new website called Calm, Campaign Against Living Miserably. And there's loads of stuff on there about triggers and how to get through lockdown if you're being affected by it, events happening locally. There is absolutely loads out there, and it doesn't take much, literally 2 clicks on your website and you're into some really useful and helpful stuff.
I think something you said then, which I thought was really good, that the privacy button. So I imagine there's so many people out there who are too frightened to phone or something in case the perpetrator walks in and catches them on the phone.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if you go into the website, a lot of websites supporting these issues, Rape Crisis, Women's Aid nationally, and us. If you go onto the site, you look on the site, and you'll see a privacy button where you can leave the site instantly. It will shut down the screen if you click on it.
And to move on to something else, because one of our previous guests, who's become a very good friend, and we found each other, Andy planned to come to your services, and that's why I wanted to come on to this. Not him in particular, because I would never do that, but people who have been groomed or abused as a child. And I said to him, when did you have to do it? Because I was tired of not doing it. I was fed up of keeping this to myself. And by disclaiming it and talking about it, then I come to terms with owning it. And now he's been able to move on with it.
Right. I think that if you're scared, and for all the reasons of what's happened to you and the trauma that ensues, people can be frightened to go in there and talk about it because they feel that potentially that they might be overwhelmed by what happens and that they won't be able to deal with that. But actually, when you're constantly pushing something down, it's called force field analysis, where when you push against something, it usually pushes back. And eventually, when you take your eye off the ball and life happens, and when you're really down, it all comes rushing out. It's like you can't hold it down anymore. And then, of course, unhealthy coping strategies you can do, because you're not actually dealing with the issue itself. You're just dealing with the behaviour. So without question, talking about it is so important. Talking matters hugely for all the reasons that we've already talked about. Is that I think that it addresses all of the feeling of isolation. It addresses the fact that you actually know you're not on your own, that other people have been through this. And although everyone's experiences are their own, we're not trying to say that everyone reacts and is the same, but there's a commonality of reaction that you can attach to and understand. And in the men's group that we ran was very much about the guys supporting each other. I was just privileged enough to be in the room because they most certainly supported each other in there, and that's what they gained. That was the huge payoff for them, was that to just sit and trust each other enough to share. They didn't have to. No one had to share anything, but what they did do was support each other massively.
And I think that's what we need, not just in this time of lockdown, but we do need that shoulder to cry on, being able to be, allowing yourself to be vulnerable, but needing the strength to accept help.
Yeah, I mean, we looked at all sorts of things. I mean, we looked at we looked very much at masculinity and what that might have meant to them, and how subsequently they've had to deal with those with their trauma and being a man at the same time. We looked at shame and guilt and what that meant from a man's perspective. We did a lot of psychoeducational stuff about what actually happens to your brain when you suffer trauma as a child and what that might mean to your coping strategies now. So normalizing, you know, why wouldn't you be feeling like this? It's not that you're abnormal feeling like this. You're absolutely normal. Why wouldn't you? So it was taking it from that perspective. So, you know, just normalizing that, you know, trauma can have a dreadful effect on people if it goes untalked about or unaddressed. But I suppose, I mean, I think you and I talked about this before we came onto the podcast, is that to get into a massive subject is about how we socialize our different genders. You know, I suppose there's a lot about gender equality these days, but there still exists a huge difference between how men and women can be socialized and parented and brought up. And the messages that we get as children as to what's okay and what's not okay, what's okay to be a guy and what's okay to be a girl, that can really affect how you move forward as an adult.
So what would you say, how we could, because I'm a dad to a 4-year-old girl. Craig, you've got 2 babies. Lee, you've got 3. So, but what would you, because let me get my words right. It's hard to teach the right thing if you don't know it yourself. Does that make sense?
Right, because yes, because we tend to parent how we were parented ourselves. You know, there's no manual comes with how to be a parent. There's no, it's so hard. So it's like you don't know what you don't know. So most people fall back on how they were parented. But if that meant that there were issues around that and that it caused problems, or there were, you know, that there was an abusive situation or a dysfunctional family relationship, becoming a parent yourself can be scary. You don't want to repeat those patterns. But just knowing that, I think that you're aware that you don't want it to be the same as what happened to you. It gives you a bit of a baseline, doesn't it? It's about being kind. And I think that's not a gender thing, isn't it, about being kind? It's about understanding how your actions impact on other people. And I think certainly when you're growing up, you know, children are quite self-centered, aren't they? And I think one of the ways that, you know, you mature and become an adult is how you understand how what you do impacts on other people. When we start to look at the prevention agenda from the government around, you know, healthy relationships, rape and sexual violence, we have to go into schools to talk about healthy relationships, what's okay, what's not okay, to get the message out to young people. Because when you get to 18, if it's normalized and that's the experience you have at home, and there's no one saying, actually, this is not okay, then you've kind of lost it at that point by the time they're 18. So the younger that you can, you know, the age of the children, appropriately, using appropriate language always, of course, is talk to children about how we respect one another, and what's okay and what's not okay. And I think not being frightened of having those conversations.
Well, I said to you when we met on the phone earlier, I said, I asked Jasmine a lot to say, what's more important, to be beautiful or to be kind? And she always says, to be kind, Daddy.
Always. I mean, I have a child, I had a daughter. And before I moved into working with these issues, I used to think, well, you know, how can you talk to children about these issues? You have to shield them. Actually, the way you shield them is to talk to, and how you prepare them to be healthy, functioning adults is to have those conversations early on, so that there's an understanding and that, you know.
Well, you saying that, it's like I thought, like with all the sexting and all these things, I thought it'd be a conversation I'll be having with a teenager. But I've said to her early on, saying, you never let people take photos, and these are your private areas. And I thought, better to tell her now than it to be a shock later. I'm not explaining why she shouldn't do it, just these are, you don't show your bits to people, and this is your place.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a big push now on, I don't know if you've heard the term ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, and how they impact on adults. And most certainly it's, you know, domestic abuse, drugs and alcohol, and mental health.
Is there anything you'd like to say about all this, Aaron?
Yeah, sorry, Jenny. I was just going to ask about something that you mentioned previously in relation to obviously it being Mental Health Week. In relation to somebody not having to reach out or get that far, I know you were saying that you're preparing for referrals. Sorry, is there an echo?
No.
Is it okay? Yeah, sorry. So you're...
Yeah, I can't really hear you very well.
Right, apologies. I had a feeling. Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
No.
Is that better? Yeah, apologies for that. Sorry.
Can you hear him, Jenny? Sorry.
That's okay.
Can you hear me okay?
No, you're breaking up. It's coming in and out.
Sorry. My internet's been an absolute mess. I'll leave it just in case, but I'm just going to write it in the comments and then maybe one of you guys can just quickly ask.
Okay. Yeah, sorry.
No problem.
It's amazing. In 2020, we were all having bad internet connection. But alongside with the sexual abuse and the domestic abuse, I know when I've talked to Debbie before, she's saying about modern day slavery.
Yes. Unfortunately, yes. It's really come to the fore in the recent years. Is serious organised crime used to be drugs and arms, and now it's easier to move people than it is drugs. And unfortunately, the economic situation in many countries is that people are fleeing for a better life. They would be. We all would if we were in that position. And then, of course, then you have people who are willing to exploit that. And we have at Black Country Women's Aid, we have modern day slavery services where we do outreach to the whole of the West Midlands policing area. And that's the 3 forms of modern day slavery, which would be domestic servitude, women who are in the sex economy, and predominantly men, whether it's forced labour. And we have all 3 in service. We have a refuge for women who are fleeing. They tend to be more pursued when they flee because of the amount of revenue that can be made from them. But we have women and men from all over, from Vietnam, from Africa. A lot of young girls from Africa are brought in for the domestic servitude. But very much we're working to support them, to help them. The government will identify them as having been potentially brought in for slavery. They'll have a period of rest and recuperation where the government will look at their status. And then they'll stay with us if necessary, or we support them in the community. And then we help them to move on with their immigration status and housing. But it's unfortunately, if you looked at it in purely business terms, and I'll use a business term here, it's our biggest area of growth in terms of business. As to when you look at the numbers that are coming through, it's frightening. The number of people who've been identified and need support.
Roughly.
I was actually going to ask that. Sorry, Kev. I was actually going to ask that. Do you feel that this is like that part of the business or your organisation is always on the back foot? It's always going to be reactive as opposed to proactive? Because I mean, we know it's been going on for as long as people can document, like human slavery, any kind of slave labour. So do you feel that you're always going to be on the back foot with it as opposed to stopping the leak, as it were?
Yeah, Black Country Women's Aid will always, in a sense, be the support element. We have to rely on the powers that be, the policing and the border force, to try and stop this. Certainly when we're working with people in what's called the National Referral Mechanism, if they're able to, the authorities will always want to know if they can help identify the people who are running the gangs and the slavery trade, because obviously they want to stop it. We actually can't stop it. We can support those who've got entangled in it and been exploited by it. So in a sense, we are on the back foot because we're only having to deal with the consequences of it. Our organisation currently can't address it from a preventative element, but we can be there to support and move people through it and onward.
Thank you.
And it just makes you physically sick, doesn't it? To these poor people. And these are the ones we know about, the poor souls who fell through the cracks.
Yes, it's very hidden, and sometimes difficult to prove, even if you are. And people become so desperately displaced because they're frightened to go home in case the traffickers find them again, or their families are threatened if they don't return to whatever it was that they were being forced to do. So it's fraught. People say, oh, you know, we can just go home. Well, sometimes you can't go home because of the fear of the repercussions of going back, because that's where they're trafficked from where they've come from.
Do you think a lot of that as well is, I think it was Ricky Gervais did like a speech, a controversial speech at, was it the Golden Globes or something not long back? And he went on about big corporations are actually use slave labour. I'm pretty sure is what he insinuated, the big technology companies. Do you think it like stems from that kind of thing? Obviously, you've got like the criminal aspect of it, but if you've got like big corporations that are world-renowned brands that are using cheap labour and you know, like slave labour prices, it sort of sets a precedent as well.
Okay.
You know, do you think that's some of the problem as well?
Well, there's about 3 or 4, maybe 5 issues right there. You know, I mean, I suppose not the easiest, but the one that would come straight to mind potentially, you might be referring to, would be the cheap labour in China that feeds the clothing industry. Yeah. I mean, that's an international issue, but what we're faced with is more, I think, exploiting individuals. I mean, the people that come through to us, it's that time immemorial, isn't it? Is that there's people who will take advantage of those weaker and more needy than themselves. You know, you hate to think that's human nature, but unfortunately, that does happen. And I think that although I would love our organisation not to exist, you think, you know, it would be great if we didn't have to exist to support those who are being exploited. But I'm glad that we do, so that we can.
Yeah.
I think it's remarkable what you guys are doing. Lee, has Aaron read that message? Has it come through?
He has, but I'll ask that in a minute for you. I've got a couple of questions myself, if you don't mind. I think that's a good question to kind of close with. I want to know a bit more personal. How did you get into your role, and how do you deal with? Because obviously you're going to hear some horrific stories, no doubt. How do you deal with that yourself?
Okay, I came into I trained as a counsellor 20 years ago, and I was always quite passionate about women's issues. I grew up in the 70s, so I was a bit of a, you know, I came up through that era. I wanted to do something that I worked in the travel business for 20 years. And after I had my daughter, I decided I wanted to do something that was, I had a portable skill that I could take anywhere with me, and that I could work. Some of it wasn't all altruistic. Some of it was practical, that I wanted to have a role that was more flexible. So I trained as a counsellor, and then as part of my placement, I had to have a placement where I had to do 150 hours in a voluntary sector placement, and I worked at Sandwell Rape Crisis when there was one. And what happened then is, after I'd done my placement there, I ended up being employed by them. I had a part-time role actually working for them. And my role really has evolved from there. When Sandwell Rape Crisis was decommissioned, I worked alongside our Chief Executive Officer, Sarah Ward, who still the Chief Executive Officer there, the CEO. And we decided to embed a rape and sexual violence service inside a domestic abuse service, which was highly unusual at the time because they're usually separate. The two organisations don't normally sit together, but we put them together, and I've worked there ever since. So I've been at Black Country Women's Aid for 16, 17 years, and we've evolved from having, I think, 25 employees. I think there's 140 at the moment. And that's by diversifying, by investing in our workforce and good solid training. So I sort of have worked my way as the organisation's got bigger and bigger, and I've taken on different roles. I've had to start with, because as we diversified, you always grow quite quickly, and there's that dreadful moment where you're bigger than your organisational. You sort of stretch yourself to grow. So I've done some domestic abuse management and sexual violence management, and have loved it really. And I have never become immune to it. I think I still have days where you sit and you listen to someone's story and you think, oh my goodness. And I think the day you're never touched by the human story and the trauma that you listen to is the day you should quit. Is that I think that you learn, I think, to not take things home. I call it sticking to you, where you have that time between leaving work and getting home, where I'm able to compartmentalize that and leave it at work. It's almost like shutting your filing cabinet, and you may think about something on the way home, but you actually leave it behind in the car, or you leave it halfway. There's sort of psychological sort of little techniques that you can use, and it does come with experience. I think, trainee counsellors, that's one of the things because we support student placements, is about very much not getting, how do you protect yourself and not become affected by that? But you are affected because you're human, and it is very sad and traumatic stories that you're listening to. But, you have to learn to take care of yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of others. So it's about having those professional boundaries to allow you to do the role that you do. And that does come with experience. And there's always sometimes the odd client that will perhaps affect you more than others. But why wouldn't they?
Because what you said about that's brilliant, by the way. But when you were saying about that organisation, something Red Cross was closed down, and over the last 2 decades, really, we've lost so many organisations, haven't we? But I hope after this lockdown, we'll realise we've got to start throwing money, yes, at the NHS, but we've got to be throwing money at the mental health services.
Yes, I think since the sort of the big crash of 2008-9 and lots of services, unfortunately, lost funding, and it's been a slow decline, really, of all sorts of really much needed support services. I mean, the changes of how organisations get their funding, and local authorities, and the big commissions, and it's been difficult to navigate. But I'm hoping that after this, it has exposed gaps in people, getting the right help, and the lack of the capacity to help everyone. But I think the government have noticed that and aware of it, and are starting to look at ways to support people more and invest more in support services. So that is good, absolutely. And I think, whether you like them or not, or whether you support them or not, William and Kate from the Royal Family, very much, they're trying to raise the profile of mental health, and certainly I think men's mental health. With the work that Harry did before he left, were around with the men coming out of the armed forces. I mean, I used to see a lot of that in the gambling rehab. It would be sports personalities and servicemen who were suffering with gambling addiction and their mental health. So to aim at those, and I think there's lots of celebrities coming forward, or people, high profile people who are now starting to talk more about this, and to show their vulnerability and to share how their journey and their I suppose their fear of going forward, but actually they've gained so much more by fighting through that fear and talking, and what they've gained and the benefit they've gained from that.
Well, if you think about the two princes losing their mother so young, and that would have been to lose your mother at any age is terrible, but they're poor, and they were children having to pray at the funeral. And so I think that's why they're doing it, because at a young age they understood what mental health was, and the pain.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think there's lots of really, you know, there's lots of good campaigns. There's lots of awareness raising going on. And I think that now, you know, unfortunately, I think through lockdown, it is going to make things worse for some people. But I think that now that those conversations are coming through, that now's the time, you know, when you can start to get out and about more now, is to really think about, you know, what you might need for support and what you might need or for help and who to go to, because there's certainly a lot, you know, it's easy to find just on the internet. As I said, type in Men's Mental Health Awareness Week and it just loads of it comes up.
Something you touched on just as well was about the gambling addicts. Would you talk about that? You said something just off camera and I thought it was brilliant. So if you'd like to talk about the work you do with that as well, please.
I don't do it anymore, but I did. I worked for the Gordon Moody Association, which ran two. They were gambling rehab programs, one in Dudley and one in Beckenham in Kent, and we basically it was for men at the extreme end of gambling addiction, where, as you said, they'd lost so much, and some of them they came to us instead of going to prison because they weren't actually a threat to the public. And that it was decided that they would come and do it was a 9-month program then. It's a lot shorter now due to funding, but they would do 3 months when they first came in, looking at triggers and where the gambling had actually taken them to, some real sort of the tough work about really being honest about where the gambling had taken them. And then they'd do 3 months in counselling with myself, and there was another girl there. So, and then the last 3 months was about sort of outwardly facing, about getting jobs and about relapse prevention, because most people at some point will relapse. But it's a very difficult addiction because, as I said earlier, you know, you can't see it. There's no tangible evidence of it until it can get really chronic. But there's many reasons that, just like anything really, it's as far as the counselling was concerned, it was about looking at their life events as to what potentially brought them to that, just as you would around drugs or alcohol or self-harm or any of the coping mechanisms that people adopt. Gambling's just another one of them. There'll be something that sits underneath it.
Well, like with the boxing, Budweiser aren't allowed to sponsor boxing anymore, or cigarette firms, but every advert, everything is William Hill, put a bet on. And I'm thinking, an addiction is an addiction.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, it is. And it isn't easy. I mean, like any addiction too, but that's, as you say, completely in your face now. The television after 9 o'clock, you can't escape it.
Has anyone got anything to say, Craig or Lee? Or does Aaron want to type a message, or have we got any messages coming in?
So Aaron, unfortunately, Aaron's internet has gone down and he's gone off, but he did leave me a message. So I'll just read this out now. So Aaron wanted to ask if there was any potential tips or tricks or advice Jenny would recommend to people at home, maybe to mitigate some of the influx of referrals we may get post-COVID lockdown.
Okay, so the question is how is Black Country Women's Day going to cope once the lockdown's gone and we're going to be
it's more if you've got any advice how people can kind of help themselves before getting to the point of coming to you.
Okay, if you go on to one of the websites, I think, well, first of all, it's about what's happening. I mean, why are you safe? You know, you can come out of lockdown if your life's at risk. Come out. There's phone calls. I've just given out the telephone number. There's a 24-hour line, and there is support there. If you need to leave. That might sound a bit trite and easy, but most people know their own risk, and if the risk starts to go up and they think things are starting to get to a head, there is support out there for you. If you can contact us in any way to try and reach out so you don't feel alone and isolated, we've got the WhatsApp call, we've got the website, and there are the girls on the end of the phone. The offices are manned 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. There's people there on the end of a phone. So I think it's about and treating yourself with kindness. You know, everyone deserves to be treated with respect, and sometimes our own voices can be a little harsh in our own heads. Sometimes we speak to ourselves way more harshly than we would to a friend or a relative. And yeah, it's really tough. And of course, if you've got children as well, that makes it doubly difficult with the children being off. I think if you look at the, I think there's an ITV. Well, actually, the website that I said, which was Calm, CALM, they've got a whole list of ways to help support yourself in lockdown. There's helpful suggestions there.
So when I've talked to people who have gone through domestic abuse, I think it's not the fear of being punched in the face, because a punch is a punch, isn't it? But it's the fear of being punched, or it's when you've lost your self-worth, thinking, well, if I leave this person, who then is going to want me? Because I am just this. And I imagine that's what so many poor people go through. And if, as you just said, if the fear or that something's going to happen, it's worth leaving the house, it's worth leaving the situation, because you've got to put yourself and your children first, and you are better in this situation. Someone will love you.
Right, absolutely. You know, people's identity, their personal identity, can be stripped away, and they feel that that they're worthless. And what they're doing is they're absorbing the words of the person who's abusing them, and they're taking them as their own, and they don't feel like they have an identity. If you go onto the website, it says some stuff to help you through this strange time. So there's all sorts of stuff there. But absolutely, you know, is that you can lose your sense of who you are and feel worthless. But that's part of, you know, there's a process of domestic abuse, and part of that is isolating people. So you're now doubly isolated. And also chipping away at a person's view of who they are themselves and their personal identity.
Well, it's been wonderful, Jenny, for coming on. I'm going to ask you two things. When we finish, I like to have our guest think of a quote or an inspirational thing. But before I ask you that, we've already touched on it. But I'm going to ask every guest this week this. What positive do you think will come out of the lockdown for mental health?
Sorry, can you repeat that? You broke up a little bit.
If there is any, can you think of any positives that we can take out of this lockdown considering mental health?
Yes, I think it's shining a tractor beam on it. It's being illuminated. It's being talked about. Certainly men's health, you know, which sometimes you can lose a bit under the radar, but lots of services, you know, and lots of talk on social media, lots of support for each other. I think there has been that sort of towards the NHS, and in general, people have been reaching out to help other people and showing kindness, perhaps where we didn't before. And I think that absolutely that's going to happen, and hopefully that continues. But I think services and the conversations that are being started now will continue.
And have you got any quotes or sayings that have helped you get through your dark times?
Before I came on the show today, on the podcast, I was looking at various resources that I could talk about during the podcast, and in it was this little magazine. It's an online magazine. It's called Happyful, which sounds a bit cheesy. And I thought, oh, what's that? And I had to look. And there was an article in there with this guy who'd been in some really dark and lonely places, and he'd faced suicide and mental health. And he said one of the things that he would say to men who felt like that was, it's about living with hope and not existing with despair. So I think to live with hope is much better than to exist with despair. And if you be brave, reach out, and there will be people that will help that will be there for you and help you and listen without judgment.
Well, once again, thank you very much for coming on. Now, all this week, we're going live at 6 o'clock on these two channels, on Facebook Live and YouTube Live. Tomorrow, we're joined by Mick Maguire, who's the head coach at Jewellery Quarter Boxing Club in Birmingham, where we're going to be discussing mental health within boxing gyms and the boxing family. So hopefully you'll all tune in next week, tomorrow, get my words out right. So until we talk tomorrow, gang, ta-ra a bit.
Listen.
And that's a wrap for another show. But if there are any comments or messages that you would like us to read out for our next podcast, please be in touch. There are also lots of different organisations at the bottom of this page, and hopefully they can help you or someone you care about. Please share this to spread the word. Until we talk next time, ta-ra a bit.